The early years, building a legacy. Terence Crawford was born in Omaha, Nebraska, a city that seemed to offer little for a young boy with big dreams. His early life was shaped by challenges that many would consider insurmountable. Raised in a neighborhood where survival often meant avoiding danger rather than chasing dreams, Crawford's world was filled with obstacles. Yet, from the moment he could walk, it was clear that he had a fight in him. His mother, a single parent, worked tirelessly to provide for her children. Terence's father, who was absent for most of his life, had left a void that would shape his character in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Without a father figure to guide him, he relied on the strength of his mother and the resilience of his older siblings. Their support was unwavering, yet the streets of Omaha demanded something more, a grit that could not be bought, only earned through perseverance. At the age of 7, Crawford was introduced to boxing. It wasn't a glamorous introduction, there were no flashy gyms or big-name trainers. Instead, it was a community center where kids fought for respect, and where Terence discovered an outlet for his anger and frustration. The boxing ring became his sanctuary, a place where he could transform his pain into something more powerful. But he wasn't just fighting for a title, he was fighting for a future that seemed impossible to reach. His early days in the gym were not easy. The other kids, often older and stronger, tested his resolve. Yet Crawford, though young and inexperienced, possessed something they couldn't match, a hunger to prove himself. He learned quickly, not just the mechanics of boxing, but the art of persistence. Every punch he threw, every bruise he bore, pushed him closer to something greater than himself. The streets may have tried to claim him, but the ring became his escape. By the time he was a teenager, Crawford had already started to make a name for himself in local tournaments. But these early victories were more than just about winning, they were about defying the odds. He was a boy from a neighborhood where few ever dreamed of anything beyond survival, yet he dared to dream big. The turning point came when he began to take the sport more seriously. As he progressed, so did his focus, discipline, and technical skill. He trained harder, pushed himself further, and began to see the fruits of his labor. But the biggest challenge wasn't just in the gym, it was in his mind. The same streets that shaped his toughness also held the potential to destroy his dreams. Crawford's story was just beginning, and the first chapter was written with sweat, struggle, and the resolve of a young man who refused to let his circumstances define him. By the time he stepped into the ring for his first professional fight, he wasn't just a boxer, he was a testament to the power of resilience. The journey had only just begun, but one thing was certain, Terence Crawford was no longer just a boy from Omaha. He was becoming a force to be reckoned with. The rise to glory, breaking barriers. Terence Crawford's professional debut marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would demand everything he had and push him beyond his limits. Stepping into the ring for the first time as a professional, he wasn't just fighting for a paycheck or recognition. He was fighting for respect, for validation, and for the dream he had held on to since childhood. The world of boxing, notorious for its ruthless competition and unforgiving nature, was about to meet a fighter unlike any it had seen before. His early professional career was defined by one key factor, adaptability. Unlike many boxers who rely on brute force or a single, dominating style, Crawford's greatest strength was his ability to shift and evolve with each fight. His slick footwork, sharp ring IQ, and ability to seamlessly switch between orthodox and southpaw stances made him a nightmare for opponents. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a chameleon in the ring, always one step ahead. But as his victories piled up, so did the stakes. Crawford was no longer fighting unknowns, he was facing seasoned fighters who had been at the top of their game for years. His biggest test came when he faced opponents who saw him not as a rising star, but as a threat to their established legacies. The fearlessness that had carried him this far now became a source of danger. These fights weren't just physical battles, they were psychological wars where every punch thrown held the weight of his future. One of the defining moments in his rise to prominence came when he faced the veteran boxer, Ricky Burns, for the WBO lightweight title. The match was more than just a chance for Crawford to secure his first world title, it was his chance to prove that he belonged among the best. Burns, a seasoned fighter with a wealth of experience, expected to dominate. But Crawford's tenacity and skills told a different story. He didn't just win the fight, he outclassed Burns in a way that left no doubt about who was the future of the division. It was a defining moment, a statement that he was no longer the hungry upstart, but a legitimate champion in the making. Yet, even as Crawford's career began to shine, the obstacles were far from over. Boxing is as much a business as it is a sport, and Crawford quickly found himself caught in the tangled web of promoters, contracts, and negotiations. His rise to the top was often delayed by behind-the-scenes battles, where money and power played as much a role as punches and knockouts. Yet Crawford's refusal to be controlled by these forces only added to his mystique. He knew what he wanted, to be the best, not just in title but in legacy. In the face of adversity, Crawford didn't shrink. He didn't retreat. Instead, he met each challenge head-on, breaking barriers that seemed insurmountable. Each fight, each victory, brought him closer to something greater, a place in boxing history that was rapidly becoming his to claim. By the time he stepped into the ring for his first bout as a multi-weight champion, Crawford was no longer a fighter looking for validation. He was a fighter carving out his legacy, one punch at a time. The rise to glory was never easy, but for Terence Crawford, the struggles were simply another part of his story, one that was far from finished. The champion's struggles, navigating the challenges. By the time Terence Crawford had ascended to the top of the boxing world, the weight of his success began to take its toll. What once seemed like a clear path to greatness now became a maze of obstacles both inside and outside the ring. The intensity of the spotlight, the weight of expectations, and the internal battles he faced were no longer just challenges, they were defining moments that would test his resolve in ways he had never anticipated. As a world champion, Crawford was no longer just fighting for his own dreams, he was fighting for the pride of his city, his family, and his fans. But with success came expectations that could either lift him higher or crush him under their weight. The pressure to remain undefeated, to maintain his position atop the rankings, became an ever-present force in his life. Every fight felt like a must-win, and every decision, both in and out of the ring, carried the risk of losing it all. One of the biggest hurdles Crawford faced wasn't just the physical toll of boxing, but the emotional strain. The demands of being a champion had begun to strain his relationships. His family, once a source of strength, became a source of conflict as Crawford found himself balancing his career with his personal life. The isolation that came with fame was deeper than it seemed. At times, the only thing that felt real was the grind, the endless training, the weigh-ins, the fights. Yet even this ritual started to wear on him. The constant cycle of preparation and performance left little room for anything else. Compounding this emotional toll were the physical injuries that began to accumulate over the years. Boxing is a brutal sport, and Crawford, despite his remarkable resilience, could not escape the wear and tear that came with each fight. Injuries to his hands, shoulders, and knees began to slow him down. Recovery times grew longer, and doubts crept into his mind. Was it worth it? Was the pursuit of greatness worth the sacrifice of his body, his health, and his peace of mind? These were questions Crawford grappled with, not just in the quiet of the gym but in the silence of his own thoughts. And then there were the behind-the-scenes battles, negotiations with promoters, contract disputes, and the business side of boxing that often threatened to derail his career. Crawford, a fighter who had once focused solely on his craft, now found himself in a battle he had never expected, a fight for control over his career. He began to realize that boxing wasn't just about punches, it was about power, money, and influence. Every contract signing felt like another round in a fight where the stakes were higher than ever before. Despite these struggles, Crawford refused to back down. Each challenge became a reminder of what he had already overcome. The fighter who had once stepped into the ring with little more than hope and grit now faced these battles with the same determination that had propelled him to the top. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that greatness was never achieved without struggle. The champion he had become wasn't defined by victories alone, it was defined by his ability to face adversity head-on. The journey to greatness was never a straight line, and Crawford's story was no exception. But with each hurdle, his resolve only grew stronger, preparing him for the battles that lay ahead. Legacy and impact, the lasting mark. Terence Crawford's journey had come full circle. The boy from Omaha who had once fought not just for titles, but for a way out of the harsh streets, was now a man whose name was etched in the annals of boxing history. Yet, despite the championships, the accolades, and the recognition, Crawford's legacy was about more than just victories in the ring. It was about the impact he had on those who watched him, and on the sport he had come to define. By now, Crawford had become a symbol of resilience. His story wasn't just one of athletic prowess, it was the story of overcoming adversity, of pushing through every obstacle that life threw his way. For a fighter who had started with nothing but a dream and a pair of worn-out gloves, the magnitude of his success was something he had never allowed himself to fully grasp. Each title, each victory, was a testament not only to his skills but to his relentless pursuit of greatness. But Crawford's influence extended beyond his own triumphs. He became a beacon for young fighters, especially those coming from humble backgrounds, who saw in him not just a champion, but a reflection of their own potential. He proved that the dream of becoming a champion wasn't just for the privileged few, it was for anyone who was willing to sacrifice, to fight, and to persist in the face of overwhelming odds. His rise to the top was a call to action for those